We are doing Meet a Scientist, and I'm going to introduce our first scientist, who's Dr. Liz Kwan. She's a research scientist in the Department of Genome Sciences at the University of Washington. Hello, Liz.
Hi, David.
Our second scientist we're going to meet today is Ray Sanchez, who's a graduate student in the Department of Biology and the graduate program in Neuroscience at the University of Washington. Hello there, Ray.
Hey, David.
Hey, and finally, we're joined by Dr. Suzanne McDermott, who is a research scientist at Seattle Children's Institute. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi, David.
Hello. Welcome back. So really quickly, same as we've done, Suzanne, what do you do in STEM?
So I'm a research scientist here at Seattle Children's in the Global Infectious Disease Research Center. And basically I work on single-celled parasites that cause neglected tropical diseases, so the parasites that cause sleeping sickness and malaria. And we're really interested in understanding how these parasites function, how they work, so that ultimately we can develop new drugs to target them and hopefully help the people that get them. And then more recently, also looking at the immune responses to these parasites and also vaccinations against these parasites in the hope that we can also maybe build better vaccines. And so day to day, my day is really consisting of experiments at the bench, data analysis on my computer, writing endless grants, papers, spot of teaching as well. So I really enjoy the variety.
Thank you, Suzanne. Ray, how about yourself?
So I'm a graduate student at the University of Washington. I'm working on getting my PhD in neuroscience right now. And I study how the brain regulates the timing of sleep and the quality of sleep. And I'm specifically interested in the circadian clock. So that's the idea that there's this clock that we have not only in our brains, but also clocks throughout all the different parts of our body that control when we sleep and do lots of other things. And I look at that in the context of diseases like epilepsy and some other sort of unusual circumstances that people might experience. And a lot like Suzanne, I do a lot of work at the bench. I do data analysis, teach from time to time, and it's pretty much what my days look like.
It's a bit of overlap there. Liz, how about yourself?
I'm a research scientist at the University of Washington in the Department of Genome Sciences, and I study DNA replication, which is how your cells copy their genetic information. So I'm interested in how this is different between different individuals based off of differences in our DNA. I'm also interested in how what we eat affects how this is changed by what we eat, and also how this changes with how we age. So most of my day is spent at the bench. I do a bit of training of graduate students and undergraduate students on how to do research, and I do computer work, writing. Everybody does writing. So yeah.
It sounds like everyone does writing. Is that like begrudgingly that you do writing, or is that something that you don't mind doing?
I'd rather be doing experiments, to be honest. So actually this pandemic has forced me to write my paper. I know that sounds pretty sad, but can't do experiments, so making sure this is the best paper I've written.
Okay, good. Well, we've all heard about what you do currently. I'm going to ask everybody to go completely in the other direction and roll back the clock. Could you tell everyone, if you can remember what it was, can you remember what you wanted to be when you were 8? And if any one of you, if something's coming to mind now, I'll let you answer that one first.
I guess I can start.
Okay.
I had this idea that I wanted to be an astronaut chef. So when I would be in space, I would also be managing a restaurant down on Earth. And then when I would come back to Earth, I would be in the kitchen, and then I would go back up on my space missions. That didn't end up working out, but it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah, that's a pretty unique one. Thank you, Ray. Suzanne, can you think about what you wanted to be when you were 8?
I think I had a few things. I think I did actually, well, I don't know, it's not sad, but I did want to be an academic. Like I would spend my time writing my own little textbooks, I remember, weirdly. But then I'm going to piggyback off the chef thing too. So I really, and still to this day, enjoy baking. And I do think that somehow got me interested in science too, because it's a really similar process in some ways. And I would be in the kitchen baking cakes and pretend I was a TV like celebrity chef. So it was a combination of the two again, I think.
Have you been baking anything while you've been in quarantine?
I wish I'd been baking more. I have been making some bread. It's a nice stress relief, but I should be baking more cakes.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. So we've definitely got a culinary theme going on. Liz, how about yourself? Do you remember what you wanted to be when you were 8?
I think I wanted to be a librarian. So I think I just wanted to read constantly and learn. So I guess, I mean, that translates well to science because you're learning all the time. So being organized does help too.
So Ray, I'll go back over to you. Do you remember what your first job was? Obviously, you wanted to be an astronaut chef. That hasn't quite panned out, but what was your first job?
My first job had nothing to do with science, actually. I worked at a pizza restaurant and made pizzas. So I guess the chef part of that kind of came in handy a little bit, but I still haven't been to space. So
it's on the to-do list.
Yeah.
Suzanne, how about yourself? What was your first job?
I think it was a newspaper round, kind of delivering the local newspapers, and then also behind the checkout at the grocery store or the supermarket, I guess, as I used to call it.
Yeah, were you running the tills?
I was running the tills, yeah. After school, I would go in. So. Very
nice. Liz, how about yourself? What was your first job?
I actually was really lucky. My high school biology teacher got me an internship at in a cancer research lab. So yeah, I started working in a summer in a cancer research lab. I mean, granted, it was very basic stuff. So like I had to be watched constantly. And my sisters who were lifeguards made like 4 times as much as I did over the summer, but it was actually a great experience. So
yeah, you're not bitter about it, all I can tell.
It's paid off in other ways. My sisters are making more money than me as a scientist, but I'm having more fun. So yeah.
Well, you referenced a great teacher that you had. So who was, Liz, tell us a little bit more about that. Who or what was influential in you pursuing a career in science?
Let's think. I have 3 people. First off is my dad. I know that's not exactly a traditional teacher, but he encouraged us to follow whatever we wanted to study. And when I started showing a great interest in science, he started reading all these books of how to help your kids succeed in science, or how to foster asking questions. So that was really exciting, especially since my family, there's no scientists or doctors. So this was kind of out of left field for him. So that was really great. Second would be my middle school math teacher, just because he fostered a really exciting place to be a nerd, I think, and enjoy math. It was actually cool to be in math team. And then third was my my biology teacher in high school, Mr. Ring. So he had these really great ways of demonstrating things like natural selection and anatomy that weren't just sitting and learning, but you would actually act out like birds competing for different seeds. And he would also organize hiking trips to Yosemite or local trails. So that was really exciting. He's great. Also really involved with different extracurricular groups too. So yeah.
Well, Ray, I'll go over to you. We've actually just had our first comment. We've got someone growing up who says, I want to become a space scientist when I grow up. So a lot like you, Ray. Awesome. Was there anything or anyone who was particularly influential for you getting involved in science or what you're doing currently?
I think my interest in science generally started also kind of in a specific way, and that's that I saw family members go through sort of experiencing mental illness and neurological disorders, And I was always curious about that, apart from also being affected and upset by that. So I think that was always kind of interesting to try to understand what was going on with that. And then my grandfather was really influential too, because he he wasn't a scientist, but he managed some mental health care facilities. So that was sort of the first idea that I had that maybe you could, have a career doing something like that. And then as I kind of got along in high school, I also had some really great high school chemistry teachers and biology teachers that helped me start to make the connections between what I had seen in my own life and then how that could be sort of studied and applied and through science. So,
well, thank you for sharing those experiences with us, Ray. Suzanne, how about yourself? Was there anyone or anything particularly influential for you?
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out. I don't know if he's watching, but Mr. Graham, my old biology teacher from when I was 16 through to 18, I still to this day remember a story he told the whole class in biology lesson. Was when he was an undergrad and he was doing his research project, and he was basically chasing bats with a sonar around the countryside in southern England on a motorbike. I think I got the motorbike part right. I might have added that. But and I just remember him telling this story and sitting there and thinking, that's quite cool. Like, I want to go and do stuff like that and have that kind of drive to be curious about all of these weird and wonderful questions that are out there in the world and that still haven't been answered. So Mr. Graham, if you're watching, thank you very much. And I hope you're doing well.
Yeah. Thank you to all the science teachers, friends, family that encourage people to participate in STEM. You are all rock stars. What a Mr. Graham. That's a great segue actually for me, Suzanne, talking about curiosity and being curious in things. Is there anything that you've been curious about maybe outside of your work? Obviously now everyone's mostly working from home, got a bit of extra time on their hands. I've been going on a strange binge of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. I've been watching all sorts of weird documentaries and reading books about it. Has anyone been curious about maybe something outside of the work that they're doing, or maybe there are parallels between the work they're doing and something they're curious about? Does anything jump to mind for anyone? Suzanne, you're nodding your head, yeah?
Well, so I grew up watching, it's an archaeology TV show, and it used to be on every Sunday night. It used to be called Time Team, and we would watch that as a family. And recently I found there's an online kind of archaeology course called Dig Ventures. And so that just started this last Monday. So any spare time that I have, I've been kind of digging into that a little bit too. So trying to figure out, how you would go about how an archaeological dig happens. And it's not like I can really do it in my own back garden here, but it's interesting to find out about. So
is that Tony Robinson?
It was Tony Robinson.
Anything else? Anyone else been curious, going off in any weird and wonderful directions with their curiosity during quarantine? No. Well, let me rephrase that. How about this? So, what are some of the ways that you've been coping with quarantine and passing the time? What are some things that you've been enjoying and that have been kind of lifting your spirits during quarantine? Ray, I noticed you've got some guitars on the wall. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah. I've played guitar most of my life, and sort of working in graduate school can be kind of hard to find the time to do that always. So I guess being at home more has allowed me to do that a little more, which has been helpful in keeping me occupied. It's also where I'm sitting right now is where I usually do my work from home, and these are right behind me. So it can also be a little distracting sometimes if I'm trying to get work done. But it's been really nice to have.
Great. Liz, how about yourself?
I've been knitting a lot, so I knit for fun. So I've been making DNA gloves. So
you hold those up just a little bit longer so we can get a good look at them.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So there was a graduate student at University of Washington who made a DNA pattern. So I make DNA gloves for a lot of people. So yeah.
That is related to what you do though. So that's very
DNA replication. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've also been taking
non-linear
dance.
thing. Sorry, go
Oh
ahead.
yeah. I've also been taking dance lessons online. So
So
there
tell
are a
us
lot of
about
different.
that.
Yeah. So I used to take Irish dance and ballet classes, and I haven't been able to go to the studio to do that. So there are a lot of classes that I've been taking online, and it's actually kind of fun because a lot of dancers from around the world have been posting different classes. So I took a class from Toronto, class from Paris, and a couple classes from Seattle, and it's kind of interesting because I don't know French, but all the ballet terms are in French, so they'll go through all the moves, and I'll understand that, but once they go into the conversational part, I have no idea what they're talking about. So yeah, but it's a great way for me to keep in shape a little, and otherwise I'm just sitting at my computer writing. So yeah,
That's great. Well, Ray, we're getting a lot of musical questions. Your guitars have sparked some curiosity in some of yous. Mayuri has said, "You play guitar? I'm a flutist!" Exclamation mark. Do we have? Are there any other musicians among us? I'm certainly not.
I play fiddle.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
Very cool.
I wish I could do that.
I wish I could too, but
Chloe, who's joining in, says I'm a violinist and drummer and a piano player. So we've definitely got some musicians watching us today.
Multi-talented.
Yeah, please keep those questions and those comments coming. We'd love to hear from you and love to connect your questions to our scientists today. So that's a lot about your journey to where you are today and some of the things that you've been doing during quarantine. But let's start talking a little bit more about the science that you do. What's the big question that your work is trying to answer? Or maybe a part of your work is trying to answer a broader question. Could you speak to what big question the work that you do is hoping to try and solve or seek some answers to? Suzanne, you're nodding, so I'm going to start with you.
You just got to ignore my nodding. So the projects that we're doing with the malaria and the malaria vaccine trial subjects, so that the big question there is when somebody receives a vaccination, which might be a parasite that has been attenuated in some way such that it can't develop in the host, it can't make an infection, or if they've had an infection, the big question is, how is the immune system, so the defense system of our body, how is that recognizing the parasite? And then how is it then acting to either destroy the infected cells in the body that have been infected with the parasite? Or how does the immune system remember, in the case of a vaccination, how does the immune system then remember the parasite such that if they're infected at a later date, that the infection can be recognized and then killed? And so we're really interested in looking at the kind of different parts of the parasite, so the proteins of the parasite that might be specifically recognized by different parts of the immune system. And then with the aim that hopefully we can then use those as a vaccine themselves if it can give a really nice immune response.
So, yes, a very big question there that you think to answer. But Ray, how about yourself?
Yeah, so from the, I guess, 30,000 foot level, the big questions that I'm really interested in trying to understand is how sleep and health relate. And we know that sleep is really important for regulating mood, for remembering things, for learning, for recovering from when you get sick. Maybe you have a parasite or something that's giving you some sort of infection. So sleep is really important for immune function. And I'm trying to do that sort of in two different contexts. And one is looking at the relationship between sleep and epilepsy. So people that have epilepsy tend to also have really disturbed sleep, and sort of losing sleep can make their seizures and other epilepsy symptoms a lot worse. So trying to understand how that relationship works. And then I'm also interested in how sleep timing and quality is affected in people who are experiencing homelessness in Seattle. So people who don't have a permanent home or a place to sleep, and looking at ways we can try to understand their sleep and try to use that to make some more recommendations for things like public housing and things like interventions that can be done to try to help people sleep better. But both of those things sort of come back to this idea that sleep is really important for so many things in our lives. So it's been kind of what's driving me in my research.
I think I speak for everyone on the planet when we say that we love that there are scientists researching sleep and touting the benefits of sleep.
I love to sleep, so it's how I got interested in sleep.
Liz, how about yourself? What big question is your work seeking to find an answer to, or that your work is contributing to a piece of a bigger puzzle?
Oh, geez. The big question I'm kind of interested in, it seems kind of tangential, but it's how we can grow older better. So how we can basically maintain our cell functions by replacing them with new cells, and copying your genetic information is an important part of that. So, and I think if you can't make new cells, you can't repair wounds or repair damage. So that's important as we grow older. So I'm just really interested in that, and also what we can do to kind of change trajectories. So yeah.
That's great. So we got a question from the audience here from Mayuri again. So Suzanne, she says that so you're a doctor, but you're a scientist. And she says that's interesting. So what is the kind of distinction between, say, a medical doctor and holding a PhD? What are some of the differences there?
I guess, I mean, first of all, nobody should let me treat them medically whatsoever. I have had zero medical training. I guess the doctor part of the Doctor of Philosophy it's a more ancient term in some ways, if you will, where kind of people studied for a prolonged amount of time to become an expert in a certain subject and then could teach that to other students. And essentially, I think that's the kind of core of the PhD, is that you work and you study on a very specific subject. And then you gain lots of other skills along the way too. I mean, it's not like I'm still studying what I did during my PhD, but I did gain a lot of skills that have enabled me to go on and study other things as well, like I've described. But the core of it is that you learn those skills to be curious, to research a subject, the experimental skills, if you're an experimental scientist at the bench, like how to do a proper experiment. And then also how to present that to other people. So how to present it in writing, how to present it in speaking. And that's an ongoing learning experience, even now. And then also you get involved in teaching other students as well. So, and that's, you know, compared to a medical doctor where you're learning to treat diseases and how to deal with people, and I really shouldn't be doing that whatsoever.
So Liz, you have a PhD as well. Could you tell us a little bit about the distinction or what that means for you in your field?
Oh, geez, yeah. So my sister and I talk about this quite a bit. So she's a doctor. So I think she, as a doctor, feels like she needs to have the answers when diagnosing people, whereas I'm trying to explore and find answers to questions that no one's thought of before. So so that's why we do a lot of experiments, because we have questions we're curious about that nobody knows the answer to. So whereas she, as a doctor, she needs to be able to figure out what condition her patient has and be able to know what treatment to give them. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Ray. We've got a question specific for you from our audience. I wonder what would happen if you slept too much. Could you speak to what happens if we sleep too long, which I think maybe quite a few of us have been recently?
Yeah, so sleeping too long can also have similar, not exactly the same negative effects that not sleeping enough can have. And actually the amount of sleep that you need changes throughout your lifetime. So when you're really young, and especially when you start to get into your teenage years, you actually need a lot more sleep, and you go to bed a lot later and you wake up a lot later. And then sort of the older you get, you sleep less and less and you go to bed earlier. And this happens with basically everybody. So sleeping too much really kind of comes down to the individual person. But I know, for example, when I feel like I've slept too much, I wake up and I feel groggier and I have a harder time focusing than if I just sort of try to get a solid, 7 to 8 hours of sleep the night before.
Gotcha. I'm going to take things in a very different direction now again. Is there something that you, maybe perhaps an experiment, or while you were in school, is there something that you've done that you've failed at, something that's not gone quite how you expected, and what kind of did you learn from that process? Because obviously the processes of science don't always go exactly how you think. As we've said earlier, you're trying to seek answers to questions that haven't been done before, and so there's a novelty to that. What's something that you've done that's not quite gone as you expected, or that you failed in some way, and what did you take out of that? Suzanne, I'll start with you if you've got something.
Oh,
Sorry.
I think, well, I still remember my first day in my PhD lab. And so I was working on something completely different. I was working on embryonic development in fruit flies. Fruit flies being a really great genetic model for other types of cells, including humans as well. And we were interested in, so the whole part of the day was learning how to dissect fruit flies. So we were interested in getting the ovaries out of the females, because we really needed the eggs in order to study how they became embryos, and then so on and so forth. And so we're there under the dissecting scopes, dissecting out ovaries. And I started learning on like a wild type strain, so a normal strain. And then I remember we had a tray of various different mutants. So they have mutations in different genes and different phenotypes. And I remember taking the mutant, and I remember dissecting it and getting really excited, because I was like, this mutant's it looks really weird. It's something really wrong with this mutant. And then the grad student who was teaching me kind of came, looked over my shoulder, looked down the microscope and said, well, that's because that's a male. That's not a female. So, yeah. So that was my lesson of what female fruit flies actually look like.
So Tom is commenting and says, if you're not making mistakes, you're not experimenting enough. So well done, Suzanne. That sounded like a humbling experience, but
it was. And it was definitely an experience of kind of not getting ahead of yourself when you're doing experiments, and really questioning, if you get a certain result, that you've really got to question it and make sure that you're confident that the result is telling you what you think it's telling you. So.
Liz or Ray, is anything springing to mind for you? Thank you for that, Suzanne.
Oh, geez. Well, the project I'm working on right now, we had very clear predictions on what we thought was going to happen. And we had, 5 different experiments that were, going to show us data that would prove our hypothesis. And then all the data came back telling us that we were incorrect. And it turns out we were thinking about it all, not that. So this whole thing was a learning experience, because everybody in the field was thinking one thing. So we were like, oh, the next logical step is our experiments. And I'm studying how many copies of this one gene we have. So there are cells with 400 copies, and their cells are with 30. And we thought, efficiency is better. So if we get rid of the excess copies, we're going to make things better. But it turns out having less copies makes things worse. But we went through 6 different experiments of all telling us that less is worse before we were like, wait, okay, now we have to go back and revisit the whole idea. But this whole thing was a learning experience, being completely wrong off the bat. And it's nothing that we did wrong. We were just, extrapolating what other people had thought but hadn't actually experimented on. So, this is why we do experiments, because we think we know something, but it might actually not be what's actually going on.
And now we do know, because you failed forward.
Yeah.
Ray, do you have any stories that come to mind?
I think the thing that comes to mind is earlier in my graduate school time, I was just wrapping up probably about a 1.5 years worth of experiments. It was going to be enough for my first paper. And I learned this really important lesson in data storage and record keeping, because I had all of my data from all of these experiments on a single external hard drive. And I kept telling myself, oh, I need to just, make sure it's updated in the cloud, everything is online, so I have some sort of backup beside this one drive. And of course, that drive died on me, and I lost all of that data from a year and a half. And luckily, we were able to recover it, but we had to send it to a service that was pretty expensive, and it kind of took it was a whole process to get all of those experiments back. So I learned that lesson the hard way, but now I'm much better about that. And I was still able to get the data and write my paper, so I guess that was a good thing.
Yeah, a year and a half's work. You nearly learned a very hard lesson there, but fortunately you were able to salvage it.
Now I have like 3 layers of backup and security on everything, so.
That is good. So my next question, if there was one thing from your area of study or your area of research or your field that you wish that the public understood or better understood, what might that be? We kind of talked about some of the big questions that your research is seeking to answer to or a part of that, but just generally about the field, what's something, maybe a misconception that the public has about your work or the work that you do, or just something related to that you wish folks would know? Perhaps it might be more sleep. It may be, what's one thing to do with your work that you wish the public had a better understanding of? Is anything jump into mind for anyone at the moment?
I think for me, with some of the other projects, so some of the parasites we're working on they're called trypanosomes. So to go back to the sleep thing, the African type of the parasite causes a disease called sleeping sickness. And then there's also parasites in South America, which are of the same type of parasite, also trypanosomes. They cause a different disease called Chagas disease. And these diseases, they're called neglected diseases because they don't receive much bandwidth or much funding. Drug companies don't really want to develop drugs against them because they're not very profitable. And so it's really to get the word out there that there are diseases affecting people in Africa and South America. And Chagas disease, for example, is encroaching into the US a little bit too. And just to say, while we're all focused on COVID, quite rightly, probably so, there are other neglected diseases out there that still do need some airtime, so that we can hopefully develop better therapies for them.
Yeah, thank you for that. Ray or Liz, is anything jumping to mind for you?
I think going a little bit along the line Suzanne said, I'd like to plug basic biology. Even though my research seems very abstract, it actually underlies a lot of different problems we have in health and disease. So like I mentioned aging, but it's also not copying our DNA can lead to diseases like cancer. So it's just kind of like the baseline, and it might not be targeted to one particular disease, but it actually affects a lot of different things. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. Ray, is there anything that jumps to mind for you?
Yeah, I think that there's this really pervasive idea in our society that sleeping is somehow indicates that you're lazy or it's not important and you can get by without it. But what sort of years and years of research in my field has shown us is that sleep is actually really, really important for very basic things that we all do every single day. And that we should be having more conversations about things that we can do in our schedules and in sort of different aspects of our lives to make sure that we're getting not just enough sleep, but good quality sleep, and sort of respecting the fact that people are kind of on different natural sleep schedules. So
thank you. We're getting some that's important stuff. We're getting some more questions. Priyanka is asking, what is one question unrelated to your research that you would like someone to answer. So, and we will take that as broadly as you would like. It could be, when is COVID-19? When are we going to have a vaccine? Yeah, so just something unrelated to your work. If someone could answer that question for you, no matter what it is, it could be science related, non-science related. What might that be? Feel free to take this as seriously or as sillily as you would like. I'll give you a few moments to think on that. Is anything coming to mind for anyone?
What does life outside our planet look like? I don't know. I do like space exploration. I never wanted to be an astronaut, but I just like hearing about it. So just the curiosity of what does life look like somewhere else? Like, do we have DNA? Is there DNA? Is it completely different atoms that are involved? Is it all mechanical? I don't know.
So an astrobiology question there, and congrats to NASA and SpaceX for successfully launching those folks from American Soul for the first time in almost a decade, and they made it there safely, as did that sort of sparkly dinosaur toy that has been accompanying them. Trevor, I think his name is. Anyone else, if you could get an answer to a question unrelated to your field, what would it be? That's okay, it's a head scratcher. Well done, Priyanka, you've stumped our scientist.
Yeah.
She's got another question though. If you weren't a research scientist though, what would you be? I know you started off as 8-year-olds wanting to do all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff, but now that you're in, now that you're adults, what's something that if you didn't do what you did now, what might that be?
I think it would still be science related, but maybe kind of trying to influence maybe science policy, I think would be one direction. I think my alter ego would have wanted to go into. So you could have a really big impact on, influencing, for example, the government of wherever you're from into, the policies they make for science, because they really affect all of us day to day. And so that would be something I would have been interested in, I think.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I know that Ray, you're in the De La Iglesia lab, I believe. Mm-hmm. And I know that there was the sleep study done in the schools. How do you translate? That's an interesting point that Suzanne raises. How do you translate scientific findings when you're producing papers and publications and research? How does that translate to action? And what are some of the challenges from scientists saying we found this, we believe this to be true? How do we turn that into meaningful action?
So I think one of the things that helps with that is exactly what kind of we do at Pacific Science Center as science communication fellows, is learning how to take the research that you do and what you figured out in the lab and being able to summarize it and sort of convey the main points to people who maybe don't know what you do or don't really understand all of the details. And I think being able to do that in a narrative way, being able to tell a story is really effective in trying to get other people to understand, but not only understand, but to feel compelled to take some sort of action based on what it is that you're saying. So Suzanne, I really like the science policy thing as well. I think going back to the first question, I probably would have gravitated either towards something like that or writing. So,
mm-hmm.
So not a musician?
Well, that too.
Okay.
That'll always be there. This was the first thing that I loved, actually. I think before science even.
Liz, we've got a question specifically for you from Mayuri. So you studied DNA, and there are theories that in the future there will be genetically modified animals and humans. Is this true, Liz? I want to know if this is rumor or real.
Oh, geez. I can't speak for humans. I know there's a lot of control about any research that's done with humans. So that there's a huge whole bunch of ethical concerns. As for animals, I think the question is if it's artificial or natural. So we actually do have, if you think about it, a lot of different animals that have been selected for different traits. So like different breeds of dogs, different types of cows have been selected for certain traits that they have. So those are examples of things with different DNA, just slight wording changes, but they've been naturally selected for. As for artificially changing them, I know there's some interest in having gene therapy as an option for helping people with certain diseases, but that right now is one we don't have the capability to do it right now. So I can't really speak for the future. I know people are interested in targeting diseases like cystic fibrosis, where we know the gene change that causes that disease, and see if we can help people with that. But as right now, we still don't have the technology to do that yet. So